But then, more importantly, he supported, along with other people in Wittenberg, the establishment in every major town what was called a community chest. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, in Detroit, where I grew up, we would have every year a fund drive for United Way and Community Chest. It was still called that. And it was, in Luther's day, an actual chest that had various locks, one for the pastor, one for the mayor, one for the head of the guilds, sometimes one for a representative from the peasants, from the farmers. And they would all come together once a month or once every 2 weeks and unlock the chest and then distribute the money out for the poor, give interest-free loans to artisans who had gone bankrupt, pay for a doctor to look after the poor people, and a lot of things like that. And so there was a real community chest. The only place where people know anything about it is if they've ever played Monopoly.
Okay.
Because in the 1930s, when they invented that game, then one of the things you can land on is community chest.
Right, yeah.
And originally that was still, even in America, had been brought over by other Protestants, but also by Lutherans. And so that idea of supporting the poor communally was very, very important for Luther. Yeah. In the United States, for example, Lutheran Social Services today is the largest private social service organization in the United States. And there are only, 8 million Lutherans, and yet we have this large network. And that's part of this continuing commitment, really throughout the history of the Lutheran Church, to that kind of thing. But certainly on the social side, Canada, at least in my view and in comparison to my own country, really does carry on with some of the things that Luther thought were most important. You do have universal health care here. You know, there's this big fight in the United States over what they call Obamacare, and I've told some Lutherans down there that they should call it Luthercare. Because we know from records that in Wittenberg, for example, this community chest paid for the doctor, for the physician. And so in any case, the fact that you have that kind of thing here, that there's a sense that that's part of what the government does, and also caring for the poor, which, at least as I understand it, is far better done here than it is in my own country. That kind of thing, I think, is really quite good. That's on the social side. On the religious side, Canada, as I understand it, is not quite as religious, in quotes, as the United States. And that in some ways Christianity is under more pressure in Canada in certain ways than in the United States. And I think that would be the one thing that Luther would do, and it certainly is the one thing I've tried to do all over the world as I visited people and talked to them about the Reformation, and that is to encourage them to remain faithful to the gospel. What Luther discovers in the 95 Theses, what he pushes, is that, as the Lutheran World Federation put it, grace is not for sale. And so the idea that God is unconditionally merciful towards us is still, among many Christian churches today, even successful ones, not at all the message that they're giving. And so for we who are Lutherans particularly, but I think generally the Christians here in Canada or in the United States need to reform the way in which they preach and teach and worship around that centrality of God's grace and mercy in Christ. And that's, I think, you know, if Luther were here, Luther would be an Old Testament professor these days, and he would be at a seminary, and he would be banging the pulpit, the lectern, and insisting that people understand that God's grace is completely unconditional, and that we receive it not by anything that we do, not by any decisions we make, but rather through faith alone, where faith really has to be understood as, my favorite line from a teacher of mine, is falling in love. And what we have as Christians to give to the world, Canadians and Americans and actually worldwide Christians, is precisely that message that causes people to hear about as the hymn goes, the lover of their souls.